Saket, it's a pleasure to have you with us. This is a discussion that I was really looking forward to, right? What a journey you've had, right? A chartered accountant who's now one of the leading technology evangelists in the country, right? There's some great work that you've been at, right? How have you been? How are things?
Thank you, thank you. Never been a better time for technology.
Right.
Business is booming. There's a lot of tech adoption, and gladly things are improving in the world with COVID going down. So very
Right.
excited for that.
Super. Super. Saket, before we dive into the session today, right, I would love you to introduce yourself. Of course, there are certain bits that I've highlighted, right? You've been a chartered accountant. You've been doing some very, very interesting work, right? Just take us through, a quick round of introduction, and then we dive into the session today.
Yeah, sure. So I started Onnivation about 4 years ago with the objective of bringing the best of Israeli technologies into India and running their India business. Started with one company, and today we have a portfolio of about 15 Israeli companies.
Wow.
And while we were growing these companies in India, we thought we should also be part of the larger story and
Right.
invest in them. So we started investing about 2 years ago, and now we
Right.
have a portfolio of about 25 companies,
Right.
which includes some of the best technology deep tech SaaS companies in Israel and some
Hmm.
of the best consumer companies in India.
Right. Interesting. Interesting. Saket, how did this transition happen, right? I mean, I'll pick you on this one, right? Typically, a chartered accountant that you come across is essentially supposed to be a numbers guy, right? And I think that's what 99% of the people in that work profile or area represent, right? How this change happened, right? I mean, what grew this affinity towards technology and technology led businesses?
Yeah, that's a that's a great question. So, look, I'm born and brought up in Calcutta,
Right.
and in Calcutta, the college I went to, about 70-80% of the students would do BCom and CA.
Right.
That was the average of five people I was
Right.
surrounded by all the time. A
Right.
lot of my family members did CA and CS, so I had no option but to just do it. It was just natural.
Right.
But the good thing is I finished it when I was 21 years old.
Right.
Now, when I finished CA and I started going to office,
Right.
accounting, auditing, I realized that I didn't really enjoy it as much.
Right.
Um, that whole desk job.
Right.
So I was figuring out what to do in life,
Right.
and right after finishing my CA, I got this idea of setting up a vada pav chain in Calcutta. Uh,
Interesting. Right.
yeah, it was called Ao Pao Khao,
Wow.
and spent a year on that. Realized the business model didn't make sense.
Right.
Tried another business, didn't work out.
Right.
And then I was, I used to be part of every other forum in the country, like
Right.
CII and FICCI and others. And
Right.
there I met an individual from the Israeli consulate,
Uh-huh.
and he educated me about Israel for the first time.
Right.
Saw that there is a lot of innovation happening there,
Right.
and innovation was a key theme for me. So I
Right.
was every time I would talk to my friends in Calcutta, family businesses,
Right.
my own family, people were very hungry to evolve and they were looking to do things
Right.
differently.
Right.
And when I read about Israel, that just connected the dot.
Right.
There's a lot of innovation happening in Israel, but they are such a small country.
Right.
They have to export, and the
Absolutely.
only country they were focused on was the US.
Right.
And that's when I saw an opportunity. I said, can I identify the most disruptive innovations in Israel,
Right.
bring them into India, and
Right.
then grow their India business?
Right.
So that's how the whole transition happened.
Fantastic. Fantastic. And there are two sides to the coin, right? I mean, before I I start to question you on that one, right? How did the name Onnivation happen? I mean, this is a very unusual name. This is not a name which comes to you naturally, right? What's the insight and background on that one?
Yeah, there's not a lot of rationale around it, to be very
Right.
honest. The theme of everything I wanted to do was innovation,
Right.
and there were few ideas that can you make it on innovation,
Right. Oh,
and
interesting.
sort of build it out. Yeah, and
Right.
someone said numerologically it made sense, so I just went with
Very
it
interesting. And I
and
think it's
didn't give it
flying.
a lot of thought.
And I think it's
It is
flying,
fine.
right?
It is fine. Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
Saket, I think you have a very interesting model at hand, right? I think you're essentially identifying these companies in Israel, which are extremely brilliant pieces of technology, and then you're building an India essentially bridge or Asia bridge for them, right? Take us
Yeah.
through the process, right? Tell us a little more about this. What are the nuts and bolts of this entire mechanism? How do these relationships come together? What is your representation like? Just take us through the entire process, please.
Yeah, I mean, before I speak about that, I could just give
Sure.
you a sense of why we do what we do.
Please.
So, if you look at the Indian tech ecosystem, there's
Right.
a lot of money being poured in.
Right.
Sequoia raised $1.5 billion fund.
Right.
SoftBank, Tiger, Tiger has done like so many deals in this year alone.
Last year.
Now, all the money being invested into these companies, the companies have a lot of pressure to grow.
Right.
Now, one of the biggest challenges that Indian tech companies are facing is hiring for tech. You
Right.
know, Finding a QA head is the most difficult task right
I
now.
agree.
We
Yeah.
know a company that has raised almost $1 billion in funding does not have a QA head.
Right.
Cybersecurity people are not even able to think about hiring because there's no
Right.
security
Right.
talent available.
Right.
So, what we saw is that all these fast growing companies
Right.
have a dire need to evolve and to
Right.
solve problems. And there are a certain set of problems which are non-core problems to them.
Right.
For Zomato, food delivery is the biggest problem, not to solve
Sure.
for cybersecurity
Right.
or for infrastructure management. So what we did was we looked at what are the non-core problems that all these high-growth consumer companies face. We went to Israel. We looked at who's solving these non-core problems in the best possible manner,
Right.
and we did a partnership with them and brought them into India.
Okay.
Right. If you look at what makes it unique, majority of these companies would only be focused on the US market.
Right.
Because US is a very large market.
And it's a
value
very
growth.
high-paying market or very high ARPU, all of that. Yeah.
Correct. And if you look at Tesla, for example, or
Right.
McDonald's, for the first 10 years, they would only focus on the US, and now after a long time, Tesla is even considering India.
Right.
So where we played a game was we were able to convince these really top-notch disruptive companies in Israel
Right.
to start looking at India.
Right.
And we offered everything to them on a platter.
Right.
Investment, sales team, customer base, knowledge of how to sell in
Right.
India, and managing all the relationships.
Right.
So that's been really our model,
Right.
identifying disruptive companies, offering them a platform in India, ready customer base, and most importantly, solving the problems of large,
Right.
high growth Indian companies.
Right. Very interesting. And I think it's classically called as an arms supplier game, right? Where you are letting people focus on their core, and and you kind of provide for a lot of other things that are essentially say not so much core. And they have they're going to possibly go out and and use these solutions and plug it into their ecosystem and improve their offering. And I think, which is a fantastic model, by the way, right? I think I don't think there is anybody else who's doing that in India, Saket. Is that a correct understanding? Or
Yeah,
not
I
many,
mean,
not in institutionalized format, the way you are doing it.
yeah, I'll always be biased for me to say it, but I think we have a very unique edge and we are far ahead in the game in terms of the client base we have, the kind of companies we work with.
Right. Saket, this is, while I was, of course, reading about more of what you do and stuff like that, right? It says there is a certain JV that you form, right? Now, typically, what is a transaction like? So, are you investing in these companies in Israel? Are you bringing them to India, and then sort of is there a JV that comes into the process? What are the operating mechanics of this relationship, right? Of bringing these people in, right? Because you're giving a lot to them. You're literally becoming a partner in the process, right? Now, is that partnership as an investor, or is that partnership more on the business side of things, saying that this is a piece that we will help you build, right, on the ground with, of course, all the connects, all the network, everything, right? What are the operating mechanics of this?
Yeah. So the story behind this is that when we started working with these companies, the first company that we got into India,
right.
And the third company that we got into India, we were almost doing 10 to 20% of their revenue, overall global revenue, and one got acquired for almost $500 million. The other is valued at $300 million. So we realized that we should also invest in these companies.
Right.
So our main model is revenue share. All the investments from an India business perspective is done by us, and how a typical partnership works. We share the revenue in a certain way. And the second is investments. So if we are bringing a company into India, we also like to invest in their cap table at the holding company level.
Right.
So with that rationale, we started investing in multiple companies
Okay.
in Israel over the last 2 years.
Interesting. And the India piece, how does that work? I mean, you set up the team for them. Is this like a JV that you do with them? How does it work? Or they
Correct.
continue to, it's a holding company operation that you help them build in the country.
No, so we set up the team, we run the sales,
Mhm.
and there's a simple revenue split.
Okay, very interesting. So there is
Yeah,
nothing that you're doing, for example, local incorporation, not those modalities. You essentially
not so
it's a
much. No,
it's
no,
a
it's
it's
a
an
very
independent.
simple,
It's
straightforward.
a very
Yes.
yeah. I think you're keeping it clean in that sense. Uh,
Yeah, it
Saket,
helps us launch faster. So
I
that's the
am
play.
particularly interested in knowing some of the companies, some of the companies, right? And I think you've been able to build a very strong trajectory for some of these companies, right? Can you take us to say one or two of them that you've invested in, right? And you've helped them scale in India, uh, phenomenally, right? And I think 2020 has been a good year, right? So you can give it to us in a 2020 context as well, right? Which is kind of really fast tracked adoption of technology, right? And it's
Yeah,
really sort of pushed the entire adoption of technology, right? And I think I'm sure this has been a happy time for you in that sense, right? If you could take us
correct.
to some of those companies, I think it'll be interesting.
Yeah, I could give you two or three examples. So one company that we started with is called Spot.io, which
Mhm.
helps you optimize your AWS costs
Right,
by 80%.
right,
And whatever we save you, we charge you 20% of that. So
okay,
this company was backed by Intel and Vertex,
right,
and eventually they got acquired by NetApp for around $450 million.
wow,
Uh, so the proposition was so unique. Like,
right,
we save you X amount of dollars and charge you 20% of that.
right,
Takes you 30 minutes to be up and running. And the best part was Amazon would take us to their customers,
right,
because Amazon wanted to help their customers optimize their costs,
right,
so that they don't move to their competitors.
right,
So this was a very unique company, very unique model,
right,
ROI driven saving, and a very unique technology play.
right,
So this is how we started, and we built a big customer base,
right,
and then we thought, can we sell or solve other problems for the customers?
right,
So this is one. The second company that I'm very excited about is Drata, that I just
mhm,
invested in a few months ago.
right,
Recently, they raised a round by Menlo Ventures and GGV
right,
Capital in the US, about a 25 million raise. They do something called SOC 2 and ISO compliance,
right,
automate SOC 2 and ISO compliance. So if you look at any SaaS companies or any large
right,
companies now, they have to spend a lot of effort and time on building security compliances.
right,
Where Drata comes in is they help you become compliant in a very quick and efficient way.
right.
And then every time there is a non-compliance, they send you an alert. Uh,
Interesting.
we found this to be a very, very interesting play. The other company we invested in is a company called Data Loop, which
Mhm,
does data labeling and
right,
annotation. So India, if you look at, is one of the largest market for largest supplier of data labelers.
right,
So there are offices where there are 2,000 people sitting and just tagging visual data
right,
for applications in the AI and ML space.
right,
Um, and Data Loop comes in and adds a lot of efficiency. So
right,
can 2,000 people do the job of 4,000 people using
sure,
Data Loop?
right.
So we're very excited about that space, because data labeling will become very, very important
It will be.
as AI and machine learning applications become relevant,
Right,
and they are at the forefront of solving it. So these are few examples, but
very
at a
interesting.
broader level, we focus on anything that is solving for cloud, for data
Right,
science, for cyber security and marketing.
right. Saket, I have a specific question on this particular bit, right? In terms of you taking them to the clients, and there are some marquee names that you work with in the Indian ecosystem, and of course there is a certain thing that you do in the corporate innovation side of things. But before I dive into that, right, what is typically the check size, right? Because when you're looking at Indian companies, I mean, typically in India, the kind of ask and raise that we have is much smaller, right? When you compare it with the international market, right? And given that you're participating in these companies, and my sense is you're participating in them at a very early stage, right? What is the difference that you kind of see across both of these ecosystems? What's your typical participation size when you're investing in these companies?
Yeah, so look, we are a very strategic investor. So we're not a
Right.
venture capital arm. We have a angel fund, and we go in at a seed or a Series A level.
All right.
Typically, put in $25,000, go up to $200,000.
Okay.
So that's our sweet spot.
Right.
Um, and yeah, the goal is that once we invest, we are able to help them scale into the Asian market,
Right.
provide them a million ARR, in the first 1 year of our partnership, so that they can get a massive boost in terms of the valuation, go and
Right.
raise the next round.
Interesting, but you're not essentially stretched on the valuation, right? I mean, you're typically excited about the technology and the core of what they offer, right? And I think that becomes your
Yes.
real hook in the game, which is a very interesting piece, right? I think not. I wish many people start to think that way, right? Where they're not necessarily too worried about getting the valuation right, because I think a lot of transactions in the India market fizzle out, and in fact even parts of Asia for that matter fizzle out largely because we're trying to optimize valuation continuously, right? I think we continue to question that. While I think the technology ecosystem works slightly more differently, right? I think we're transitioning from those those traditional mindsets into I think newer mindsets, right? And I think 2020 is possibly fast track that. Second, there's
Yeah.
something very interesting that you do, which is more on the corporate innovation side of things, right? Which is corporate innovation tour, right? And you had some very exciting things on that front, right? You've taken some of the major or larger Indian players in certain sectors into the Israel market. You've exposed them to the technology. You've exposed them to the developers ecosystem. You've done many of those things, right? Tell us a little more about how have these experiences played out, right? And what's the kind of collaboration that you've been able to build through the podcast?
Yeah, look, I mean, we work with some of the largest unicorns and unicorns and even
Sure.
enterprises in India.
Right.
The likes of Sony, Star, Z, to Book My Show, Flipkart, Myntra.
Right.
Uh, One of the things that all these companies care about is how do you evolve faster and stay
Sure.
relevant for the future.
Sure.
Uh, where what we saw in Israel was that every problem, and I am always pleasantly surprised that every problem a customer of ours in India talks about,
Right.
someone in Israel has solved it. We've always found 90% of the time found a
Right.
solution. So as part of a building relationship, exposing our customer to,
Right.
even be aware of what's happening in the world, we started taking them to Israel, making them meet, our board members, key
Right.
investors in the ecosystem, startup founders who are disrupting the world.
Right.
So these tours really helped us build a better relationship with our customer, but more than that, exposing them to what is happening in the ecosystem,
Right.
so that when you're sitting in India and you're working on building your company, many times you're so lost in firefighting, you don't know what's
Right.
happening outside. So
Right.
these stores really help them take a break and really immerse themselves into the whole technology scene. So when they come back,
Absolutely.
they're inspired to think beyond just okay.
Right.
So that's our thesis, and Israel's our second home, so we know
Right.
most of the key players there. So when you go there, it's literally like a red carpet,
Right.
to like a kid in a candy store kind of experience.
Interesting. Interesting. Uh, Saket, while of course we talk of all of these things, and I think Israel has been a bed of innovation, right? In its true sense, right? I think they've done impeccable work when it comes to enterprise, when it comes to SaaS and so many other areas, right? Deep tech. There's a lot of work which has happened, right? And you've continued to sort of be a channel and evangelist, right? In that ecosystem, right? But you've also been invested in the Indian ecosystem, right? You've invested in many companies in the Indian ecosystem, right? Tell me a little more about that.
Yeah, sure. So, we've invested in a couple of venture capital funds,
Sure.
as LP, and we've done a few strategic investments. So the reason I was passionate about investing in India
Right.
is, to help Indian companies with all the expertise I get from Israel
Right.
and the US ecosystem. So I'll give you two different examples.
Sure.
One of our companies, that we invested in is Jupiter Money, which is a
Right.
neobank,
Sure.
just recently launched.
Right.
So Jitain, who's the founder, was very passionate about building a bank in the most with the most disruptive tech.
Sure.
And what we did was, we said, okay, if we come on board, we are actually able to help you visualize the future of fintech, not only from an Indian landscape perspective, but what's happening in Israel and in the
Right.
US market.
Right.
So that was the value add, because of which we got allocation.
Sure.
We invested in Country Delight, which is a dairy company.
Right.
Now, it's a very popular milk delivery app. Now, there the logic was, if we are investing, we are able to bring in all the dairy technology expertise, which Israel is great at,
Right.
into India, and support Country Delight in that growth.
Right.
Uh, from a SaaS perspective, we invested in a company called Rocket Lane. They just announced a round by
Right.
Matrix
Right.
and Nexus. So Rocket Lane is helping SaaS companies, or enterprise software companies,
Right.
in solve for implementation. So whenever a SaaS company makes a deal to a customer, it many times takes from an
Lot of sense.
hour to
Yeah.
weeks to do
Right.
implementation.
Right.
Projects are complex. So Rocket Lane solves for that part, where they help companies implement faster.
Right.
Now, the fact that we already work with more than 15-20 SaaS companies
Right.
who are very large now, that becomes a captive customer base for them.
Right.
Plus, SaaS is very big in Israel and US.
Right.
So we were able to add that value, the learning, to an Indian SaaS company.
Right.
So our goal is clearly to just add value and a very unique edge, with the learnings and the
Right.
ecosystem connect we have in both the countries.
Right. Interesting. I think while I hear you, right, I think the image in my mind is I think everything is very, very strongly interrelated, right? I think that it's a very strategic piece that you're building, right? I think one company leverages from the other, and I think there's a beautiful continuity that you're building to their product and distribution plans and all of that, right? I think which is phenomenal, right? Not a lot of across a lot of conversations do you get to hear that kind of a continuity, right? That kind of a
Correct.
strategic input and mindset. I think that's absolutely beautiful, right? I'm going to do a little more India-based questions. I mean, I know you're excited about the entire Israel opportunity and the connect with India and so on and so forth, right? But there are certain things, and possibly you can give it to me in that context as well, right? I think
Absolutely.
what has happened is that 2020 has been a very disruptive year, right? While of course it's come with a lot of many losses at a personal level, at across companies at certain levels, and so forth, right? But it's also been a year which has actually really fast tracked the possibility of adoption of technology, right? I think which possibly what we would have achieved in next say 5, 7, 10 years, and we are a slightly slow moving economy. I mean, decision making ecosystem is or decision making systems are slightly more slower vis-a-vis what happens in a developed market ecosystem, right? So I think there was a delayed demand, right? And I think this was an event which kind of really fast tracked all of this, right? But what it's also done is that it's made the product life cycles much shorter, right? Because the consumer side influence is going to change and it's going to look very, very different from how it was, right? Which means that the pressure is going to be very different, right? So while of course there are certain companies, so adoption is going to increase, and especially when you're operating a SaaS-like ecosystem. What that also means is that the situation on the consumer side is going to become a lot more dynamic, right? How do you view that as an environment that we're going to operate in, right, going forward? Second, what are some of the emerging opportunities that you think are going to become all the more exciting, right, from an Indian context?
So the first question is around. If you could just summarize the first question once again for me.
My question is that the consumer market landscape is going to become very, very dynamic, right? And that will put a lot of pressure on many companies, right? How do you view this as the phase that we're entering, right? How do you view this as, say, an investor, as an enabler, right? How do you view this? And which are some of the sectors that you think are going to kind of explode because of this entire dynamism that is coming to the economy?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. So I think everything will eventually become a lot about value creation.
Mm-hmm.
How is a company solving
Right.
for value for me, right? And something that is offering above and beyond. So
Right.
I can give you an example. I'm a big fan of the Oberoi hotels.
Right.
And every time I stay there, generally I go with an expectation of 80 out of 100, but I always get to a 200 out of 100.
Right.
So uh, as more and more competition increases, like
Mm-hmm.
Zomato would have Swiggy, LinkedIn would have Apna in
Right.
India, Twitter
Right.
would have Koo. I did invest in Koo as well.
Right.
Now consumers will start becoming more and more demanding, and India is a very demanding economy.
Right.
So there will be a very strong pressure for startups or companies to provide great customer experience and great value
Right.
to what they're offering, and a very strong differentiated offering. So the game for everyone, in my opinion, would be how do you evolve, but
Right.
evolve exponentially, right? The whole 10%, 20% growth will now not be a cool thing to have, but you'll have
Right.
to find ways to double,
Right.
in terms of your mindset, in terms of growth.
Right.
So that's the first question. Uh, the second part on what are the emerging trends, right?
Right.
Um, I really strongly feel that anything that is solving for cloud, data science, and cybersecurity will become really big areas.
Right.
So if you look at all the big companies that are scaling, in the consumer space, everything is on the cloud. Everything is a function of how do you personalize your offering,
Right.
how do you analyze the customer using the best of data tools and the best of brains, which are data
Right.
scientists. So in India, we need a lot of data scientists going
Right.
forward. So
Right.
so there's a big opportunity for you to start a data engineering school and train
Interesting.
people.
Right.
Because data engineers are the most sought after, roles in all the tech companies today,
Right.
not only in India but globally.
Right.
There's a massive shortage, uh, even shorter than the vaccine right now.
Right.
So something that you may want to look at. Cybersecurity, as in, as there'll be so much data,
Right.
there'll be a lot of hacks and a lot of attacks. Cybersecurity will become a very, very big play going
Right.
forward. So these would be my three, but I also am very passionate about food tech.
Right.
So alternative meat, alternative milk, proteins will become very big.
Right.
I invested in an electric vehicle company called EVH.
Right.
So EV will become very big. Environment, and lastly, I'm very passionate about waste management and
Right.
mental health. So there'll be a moment where all of us would realize that we need to really conserve, figure out how to manage waste
Right.
and mental health, because all of us are have so much pressure to perform and grow.
Right. Right.
Sometimes we don't know why we're doing what we're doing, how do we
Right.
prioritize,
Right.
we invested in a company called Peak Performer, which
Right.
helps you find a life coach. And I think that would be a very, very, very big play
Right.
going forward.
No, sure. I kind of agree with that particular bit, Saket. And I think I have an entire thesis around that, right? But I think we'll save that for the next interaction that we have. But
Sure.
I mean, this is my favorite topic right now, right? So I am looking at India in many layers, right? India operates in many layers. I mean, you've been in Cal, right? I mean, and it's a beautiful combination of many traditional things, and of course the newer world aspiration, right? And I think it's a very unique setting in that sense, right? But when you start to look at, I mean, Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore operate in a slightly different, way in the sense that they are more newer cities, right? It's very urban in its nature, what we consume and stuff like that, right? I am particularly excited about Bharat as an opportunity, right? And across many of my conversations, this is something that I've been. I mean, this is my honestly like a favorite question, right? Across many it's a constant, right? Across many conversations, right? How do you view that as an opportunity? Because I mean, with what you're doing, even in the enterprise, say SaaS space, right? A lot of these companies are going to be catering for Bharat, right? And that's a market which is kind of evolving. We already have very early signs, right? I mean, for example, the UGC play kind of exploded in the Bharat, the Bharat ecosystem. Let me put it this way, right? Where people just with cheap data and and the kind of creativity that was there, which was kind of pent up in a certain form and way, it was massive, right, in terms of consumption. We were talking about numbers that nobody could have even imagined, right? Platforms like TikTok, Musically, many of the Indian platforms that were there, right, were kind of picking up, right? Which essentially
Yeah.
means that there is exposure which is coming into that market, right? Which is eventually going to lead into a lot of transactions, right? What's your take of that particular bit? I mean, you're interested in the milk, you've invested in the milk business, right? And that is a key enabler in that ecosystem, right? So I don't want you to kind of talk about that particular bit. I just want to give you a macro view in terms of what's your sense of the Bharat opportunity.
Yeah, that's a great question. Look, I think the opportunity is definitely solid, and it'll only grow. I
Mhm.
can give you an example of my cook. Until last year, he did not know how to operate a bank account,
Right.
or the maximum he would tell me is, on a piece of paper he would write down his bank account number, and he, like, please transfer it.
Right.
Someone at his village would go to the branch and withdraw that money.
Sure.
Um, few months ago, I was just pleasantly surprised that he said, "Bhaiya, please transfer this
Right.
using UPI." Right?
Right.
This is my phone pay app, and he was asking me, "Can I do this through this?" He knew how to add a beneficiary,
Right.
and he doesn't know English.
Right.
So I was just blown away that uh, you know my cook was able to do all these things.
Right.
And if I just look at that segment, which is a big chunk of our population,
Right.
is now becoming more and more aspirational. They're
Right.
buying smartphones. They want to spend on high speed internet. They want to understand these
Right.
apps, these entertainment apps, spend time.
Right.
So this space is now getting exposed to a lot of things. Giving a smartphone with a geo connection to someone, um, like someone like my cook, is opening up an entire different world for them,
Right.
right? So this segment will now become more and more aspirational in
Right.
terms of consuming different products and services,
Right.
and that is where the next wave of growth will come for Bharat. So I am very excited about the space.
And I think that kind of increases the responsibility on your shoulders. I mean, I'm kind of putting it in a certain form of way. Also, because I think enterprise which are going to cater to Bharat, right, and there is no clear footprint which is established, right, and they will have to go on to do that, which essentially means they're going to need a lot more understanding and enablement through a lot of enterprise SaaS, right, and deep tech companies to help them cater
Yeah,
to all of it, right, which essentially means that there is a massive opportunity that is now available. So your role in the entire ecosystem between, say, in Israel and India and in that space becomes all the more important, right? And I'm sure you're excited about that particular bit. Uh, Again, the other question is that, and I'm taking a side step, right? So I'm kind of moving away from the core discussion that we've been having around Onnivation, and the entire bridge that you've created between India and Israel. Uh, you know, at a founding level, right? There's a huge difference when you look at, say, founders who are operating in a market like that, and when you have founders like the ones who are operating in India. And of course, that Indian founders are becoming all the more mature. It's becoming a very savvier ecosystem. Experienced professionals are coming in, right? But we're still a very inward-looking market, right? And I think that's essentially how we've kind of looked at India, right? I mean, we have not been an export nation, right? And here you are, who's enabling exports from one small country into, say, in India, and they're anyway exporting into the US market and stuff like that, right? Do you believe this is a culture that we need to kind of imbibe, right? Our founders need to imbibe. We have to start looking outward, right? And that's a big play. We have to start entering the big boys, their zones, right, and start challenging them. There's little work which is happening on that front. I mean, we'll have fewer companies in the SaaS space who are, say, operating in the US market. But when you look at in Israel, the number of companies is going to be much, much higher, right? If not less, at least it will be 5, 7, 10x vis-a-vis what we have, right?
absolutely.
What are your thoughts about that? I mean, do you think it's time for us to now start looking outside? It's very important for us to look outside. Do you think that entire space is, and of course the founders' maturity, do they need to sort of prepare themselves for a market which is slightly more mature?
That's a very interesting question. So, for sure, like, there's a massive potential outside of India,
Mhm.
and one must do it right away, right? Um, One of the I could just straight jump into some insights I have, and like some suggestions I feel. So one is, a lot of founders are building companies in India, but they are staying in India. They're settled here. I believe in this whole theory that you're the average of five people you're surrounded by,
Right,
right? So if you stay in India, you would only get the same learnings that every other person like you has.
right,
If you want to sell to the US market, you got to just shift there, right, and
right.
stay there. And
Operate there.
while you're at a WeWork coffee station, you meet someone
Right,
who could be a potential customer or who's also thinking of selling in the US market. So you got to think
right,
like the US market.
right,
And for that, it's very important to station there.
Right.
The second is just the the VC ecosystem on the SaaS industry in India is very, very weak.
Right.
I've looked at so many companies in India who are considered to be celebrity companies,
Right.
most sought after companies,
Right.
oversubscribed rounds.
Right.
And when I talk to the founders, I just feel that it's fluff because
Right.
the guys who invested, the VCs who invested in those companies
Right.
themselves don't know how to do SaaS,
Mhm.
have zero exposure to the US market.
Right.
Um, and the angels who've invested are actually consumer company
Right.
founders. So there's a massive gap in awareness where a SaaS company in the US would straight away go to, say, the CEO of UiPath or Snowflake or CTO of Netflix to raise capital,
Right.
and then find a very strong strategic VC who can help them with sales, revenue, and growth.
Right.
Whereas in Indian SaaS founders are raising money from consumer funds
Right.
and angels who have no expertise on the US market.
Right.
So I feel this is a bit of a weird, funny situation. It's
Right.
like when you go to the airport and there are six lines, for check-in, and you notice that there is one line which has no queue at all, and
Right.
but the other lines have are blocked, but people are still not going there. So that's the moment I feel one good SaaS VC like Andreessen Horowitz coming into India would
Right.
bring everything into a level play.
Right. But what do you think can change the mindset, right? What do you think can change the mindset? I think for some reason, we've looked at. I mean, India becomes a convenient option, right? You know that there is an underserved market and it becomes a convenient market, right? But I think SaaS as an opportunity is so much more massive, right? Do you think we're choosing convenience over a competitive environment, or
So
what is
it's
it that
just
can be done to change
it,
the mindset?
yeah, it's just comfort zone and awareness, right? So
Right.
so I moved from Calcutta to Bombay. I literally packed my bags, came
Right.
to Bombay without any understanding of what I'll do here,
Right.
because I just felt that Bombay, if I have to do something interesting in life, I have to be in Bombay in India,
Right.
right? Because of
Right.
people.
Right.
So so somewhere people feel that building in India is cheap, operating out of India is cheap, and it's our comfort zone. We'll try and experiment. But
Right.
look, if end of the day your market is US,
Right.
you just you should not waste any time here. You should just
Right.
settle there, right?
Right.
The opportunity cost of every single day of not being in the US is very high,
Right.
right? So it's a function of comfort zone. And second, like I said, the VC ecosystem around SaaS in India is not very strong yet,
Right.
uh, because there are a handful of SaaS VCs who stayed in the US, who've invested in SaaS companies there,
Right.
and can bring that learning into India. Which is where we feel we are playing a strong role. If we are investing in an Indian SaaS company, we're really
Right.
exposing them to the global tech ecosystem.
Right. Interesting. Interesting. Saket, how do you see the cross-border play evolving? Right. So, I mean, of course, Israel is one, right? Are there other such countries that you're identifying where there's great work happening, and then you're trying to sort of bridge that gap? What's the next 2 years, 3 years like for Onnivation?
Yeah, so look, we are largely focused on Israel because of many reasons
Sure.
and strategic reasons. We do work with US companies quite a bit. We
Right.
also see a lot of innovation happening in Europe and Sweden.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but personally, for us, that's our focus. Uh, from a cross-border play perspective, look, it's easier now to do cross-border business.
Right.
Compared to earlier, but it's still not as straightforward. The biggest thing one a company in Israel or US or any other country when they're looking
Right.
at India, or Indian company looking at the US, is what is the real differentiation and value you're adding over and above a local player
Right.
in a local player. So
Right.
if I am the company that I got Spot.io into India, they had literally no competition,
Right.
right? So that is how I was able to get the pricing right, the margins right, and the scale right.
Right.
But if there were five other competitors, for example, we got a company in the chatbot space.
Right.
The first few months the company did well, and a few months later there were 10 other players in India who started the same product. The
Right.
offering was not very differentiated.
Right.
And they were not able to sustain in the market. So differentiation, deep tech, uniqueness would be the key here
Right. Uh,
for a cross-border play tool.
Sure, interesting, right? And and that brings me to my next question, right? What is it that you look for when you're evaluating a company, right? What are some of the things that so of course I understand, the competitive landscape is very important for you because, if you I mean, you're looking at abnormal profit zone, right? Which essentially means that, you know, uh, till the time you don't have any competition or say smaller competition, right? You'll be able to charge a higher premium, which is essentially a very SaaS kind of an environment, right? And that's the pricing mechanism and model which goes in, right? What are some of the other things that you look at? I mean, it's difficult. It's easy to understand. I mean, you've been in India also, right? You've kind of all of us have been in India, right? It's easier for us to understand an Indian entrepreneur, right? A founder. But as soon as you're operating as soon as you're looking at founders in other regions, it becomes so much more difficult, right? I very firmly believe that people who are operating in slightly more developed markets are not as complicated as, for example, the requirement in say in India geography is, right? Indian founders start out in a very very different way, right? What are some of those things that you look at, right? How challenging is personality when you are looking to build a game in an India like market, which is as complicated and very relationship driven, very touch and feel driven, right? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, look, it's quite simple in my head. So one of the things I'm looking for is like the best team
Sure.
possible. So and when I say best team, the world is moving towards exponential, like I was sharing earlier.
Right.
So does a founder have that exponential mindset to really evolve, not only in India but build a global product, global
Right.
problem solving?
Right.
So that's one. Second, I am looking for founders are solving for must-have problems,
Mm-hmm.
right? So many times, we solve for things which are good to have, or great to have,
Right.
but the real butter or cheese is in solving for must-have problems.
Right.
So when I brought Spot into India, someone customers can't say no to it because I'm saving so much money.
Mm-hmm.
30-minute integration, charge you percentage of saving.
Right.
So how do you solve must-have problems, which is a burning issue for a customer, right? Is a big one to see. ROI, value creation, again, something that I really look for. Can I solve, for something where I solve worth 100 but charge you,
Right.
X percentage of that 100?
Right.
That's very, very good. And the other piece that I'm looking for it is someone solving for the future, right? How futuristic is that tech? So, when you talk about cloud, many companies in India are now talking about containers, Kubernetes,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whereas, if you look at the evolved companies in US and Israel are already talking about serverless.
Right.
So our company is really talking about the future of tech and solving for that. That is super exciting for me to look at as an investment opportunity.
Interesting. Saket, everything that we've spoken about, right? I think there is and I'd mentioned this earlier as well, right? Has a very strong correlation, interrelation, right? Or they're very, very beautifully intertwined, right? And I think that's at a design level. That's how you possibly calibrated this entire play, right? Is there a soft or a different side to it, right? Which is like, listen, this is an investment that I think is a great opportunity. It's not necessarily business, but it's more investment, right? Does that happen? I'm sure you're kind of bombarded with many such opportunities, right? What are some of those investments that you've possibly made without, say, which are not necessarily within the current framework of Onnivation, right? Which are purely done from an investment standpoint.
Yeah, so two. One is Peak Performer, which is a coaching life coaching platform.
Right.
I'm a big fan of the so-called Billions. It's on
Right.
Hotstar. It's a hedge fund and high pressure environment, and they have an in-house coach.
Right.
And when I started watching that show, I was like, I need someone like Wendy Rhodes from Billions in my
Right.
team.
Right.
And I got a coach for myself, for my team, and then I realized that having a good coach, someone who can just hear what you're going through and helping you navigate your life is so important.
Right.
So this was more of a passion project. And of course, the company is great. The
Right.
founders are amazing. I think it'll be a huge opportunity. But Peak Performer is one that I'm very excited about, other than the business aspect of it. The second is EVH. I'm very passionate about automobiles, cars,
Right.
and environment. And I think electric vehicles will disrupt, or play a big role in saving our environment.
Right.
So EVH is a company that I invested in, and they're doing really well. They have very strong interest from some of the largest retailers globally.
Right. Very
So,
interesting.
so yeah, these two.
Interesting. Uh, what are the next 2 years like, right? What are some of the investments that you're going to see on both the sides, right? On the strategic side, which you are kind of geared for and extremely focused on, and on the personal front, right? I wouldn't really call it passion project. I mean, I can see certain experiential aspects, certain observational aspects that you have into your personal investing, play. But I would rather sort of just call it opportunistic investments that you're making in your personal capacity, right? And yeah. So what are some of the things that we see in the next few years?
Yeah, from the strategic side, like I said, cloud, data, and security, like three areas that laser sharp focus. We
Right.
see a lot. The world will evolve with
Right.
these three fundamentals.
Sure.
Personal side, I'm very passionate about food. So food tech is huge interest.
Right.
Like I shared, I was working on a food venture myself.
Right.
So food is very passionate about that. And waste management would be another one that I think I would be very interested in.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Your top two or three advisors to founders, you meet many of them, right? And the beautiful part about your work, Saket, is that you're meeting many of them who are operating in a very different economy, right? They're geared for a very different kind of market. Aspirationally, they're in a very different zone, right? Our founders essentially, slightly more submissive, if I can put it, right? And not in a wrong way. It's just that that's how a cultural, piece is, right? What are your top two or three advisors, right? Two founders, right? That you think are very important, given that we're in a now very, very connected ecosystem, right? I think the arbitrage is kind of shrinking, right? Because the
Hmm.
world has moved online, right? What are your top two or three advisors?
Yeah, so the first advice is that you're the average of five people you're surrounded by. This is a thumb rule that I've followed,
Sure.
over the last 10 years, and that's been the single biggest thing that has helped me.
Right.
We're extremely particular about the people I hang out with, the friends I have. Um, you know People who add positivity,
Right.
happiness to your life, and knowledge and learning and exposure. Right where I stay to my office,
Right.
everything is designed in a way where you only attract great people, right?
Right.
And this is one learning that has really shaped my life. And I
Right.
always encourage people to build a strong ecosystem of people around you.
Right.
And leading to that is the power of network. Um, so I'm a chartered accountant. 5 years ago, I did not even know what cloud was. Cloud was cloud for
Right.
me,
Sure.
literally. And
Right.
I knew no one in Israel. I did not even know there's a country called Israel,
Right.
as a matter of fact. And now, I know so many people there. I know so most of the Indian tech ecosystem
Right.
personally well. The one thing that helped me was this whole enthusiasm to meet interesting people, learn from
Right.
them, build network. I feel a lot of people are very reserved in India in terms of reaching out, asking for help, or adding
Right.
value or giving.
Right.
So I would suggest, how do you focus on building a network would be a very strong, play. And third is just never give up. Like, keep hustling,
And I
and
think I think that's a constant.
that's a constant. I treat this whole, many times I treat all my emotions like a game, and like, if there are failures, there are successes. Like, how do you, if you fail, like, how do you restart the game and win it again? And if you
Right.
win the level, like, how do you win the next level? So just be practical about it and don't give up.
Saket, it was a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you so much for taking that time out. And honestly speaking, there are many, many conversations that I'm having, right, with many, many interesting people, right? And I think, how I wish, these conversations can go on. I look forward to having you with us soon. There are some very interesting points that you've highlighted. I think the entire enterprise space, the entire SaaS space, I think is becoming very, very interesting. I think still early days. I think there is a lot of sensibility and sensitivity which is coming around both of these areas. And I think while of course we will be an interesting economy to look for from an adoption standpoint, I think more importantly, I think we will also have many startups who are going to be offering very dynamic, sharp solutions for the global economy, right? For many developed economies, right? And I think that is something that I'm very excited about as an opportunity, right? And I would love to see some of the founders on the global map performing so much more strongly than where we are currently. Saket, it was a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for joining us for the session today.
So thank you for having me, and I really enjoyed the chat as well. All the best for your show.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.